Do exactly what I say. What happens when a giant foreman pushes the new ranch hand too far? The rain hammered against the barn roof like a warning I should have heeded. I was pressed against the rough wooden wall, chest heaving, clothes soaked through and clinging to my skin. Garrett stood barely a foot away, his massive frame blocking the only exit, water dripping from his dark hair onto his shoulders. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his beard, and his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted me for months, were locked onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "You don't get to just walk away from this, Mason," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not anymore. Not after what you just said." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Everything had led to this moment, every sideways glance, every accidental touch, every conversation that lasted too long under the stars. And now, standing here in this barn with thunder rolling across the Montana sky, I realized there was no going back. 3 months earlier, I'd pulled up to the Broken Arrow Ranch with everything I owned crammed into the back of my beat-up Ford Ranger. The ranch stretched out before me like something from a Western film, endless fields of golden grass, mountains rising purple in the distance, and a sky so big it made me feel impossibly small. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a degree I didn't know what to do with, and desperate for something real. Something that didn't feel like the hollow, suffocating life my father had planned for me back in Boston. The ranch owner, Dale McAllister, was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "You ever worked cattle before, son?" he asked, looking me up and down with obvious skepticism. "No, sir," I admitted, trying to stand a little straighter. "But I'm a fast learner and I'm not afraid of hard work." Dale studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll give you a shot, but you'll be working under Garrett Sullivan. He's my foreman and what he says goes. You understand?" I nodded eagerly, relief flooding through me. "Yes, sir, absolutely." Dale's expression softened slightly. "Garrett's tough, but he's fair. He'll teach you everything you need to know if you're willing to listen. Just do exactly what he says, and you'll be fine." I had no idea then how those words would come to mean something entirely different. I met Garrett an hour later, and my first thought was that he looked like he'd been carved from the mountains themselves. He stood at least 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained against his worn work shirt and hands that looked like they could bend steel. His dark hair was just long enough to curl slightly at the ends, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite the ruggedness of his appearance. When he turned to look at me, I felt the impact of his gaze like a physical force. His eyes were a startling gray, like storm clouds, and they assessed me with a directness that made me suddenly aware of every inadequacy I possessed. "You're the new hand?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Mason Carter," I said, extending my hand. He looked at it for a moment before taking it, his grip firm and calloused. His hand completely engulfed mine, and I felt a strange flutter in my stomach that I quickly pushed aside. "Garrett Sullivan," he said simply, releasing my hand. "You ready to work?" "Yes, sir." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement maybe, before he turned toward the barn. "Don't call me sir, makes me feel old. Garrett's fine." I followed him, trying not to notice the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt or the confident ease of his stride. This was my boss, I reminded myself firmly. Nothing more. The first week was brutal. I'd thought I was in decent shape, but ranch work required a different kind of strength, the kind that came from hours of lifting, hauling, digging, and riding. Every muscle in my body screamed by the end of each day, and I'd collapse onto the narrow bed in the bunkhouse, barely able to move. But Garrett never gave me more than I could handle, and he never asked me to do anything he wouldn't do himself. In fact, he worked harder than anyone I'd ever seen, often staying late to finish tasks long after everyone else had gone to eat or rest. He taught me how to mend fences, how to read the cattle, how to sit a horse properly so I wouldn't be sore for days afterward. He was patient with my mistakes, though his corrections were direct and sometimes sharp. "No, not like that. Watch." He'd demonstrate, his movements economical and precise, then step back and wait for me to try again. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work. He moved with a kind of unconscious grace despite his size, and he had an almost intuitive understanding of the animals and the land. When he spoke to the horses, his voice dropped to a gentle murmur that made something warm unfurl in my chest. I told myself I was just admiring his skill, his competence, nothing more than respect for a talented teacher. But late at night, lying in the darkness of the bunkhouse, I'd find myself replaying moments from the day. The way his hand had steadied my shoulder when I nearly fell off a fence, the rare smile that had transformed his serious face when I finally roped a post correctly, the way he'd looked at me across the fire during our lunch break, something unreadable in his eyes. The turning point came about a month into my time at the ranch. We were moving a herd to fresh pasture, and I'd been assigned to ride sweep, which meant following behind to make sure none of the cattle strayed. It was hot work under the Montana sun, and I was focused on a particularly stubborn cow when I heard shouting up ahead. I looked up to see one of the younger steers had spooked and was charging directly toward me. Everything happened in a blur. The steer was massive and moving fast, and my horse, sensing my panic, started to rear. I felt myself sliding backward, the ground rushing up to meet me, and then suddenly there were strong arms around me, lifting me clear of the horse just before its hooves came down where my head had been. Garrett had somehow crossed the distance in seconds, pulling me against his chest with one arm while he used the other to control his own horse. The runaway steer veered away at the last second, spooked by the sudden movement. My heart was hammering, adrenaline flooding my system, and I was pressed so tightly against Garrett that I could feel his heart pounding just as hard as mine. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. His arm was still wrapped around me, holding me secure against him. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I was acutely aware of everything, the solid warmth of his body, the smell of leather and sweat, and something uniquely him, the way his arm felt like the only thing keeping me from flying apart. "Mason," he said more gently, and I forced myself to look up at him. His face was inches from mine, close enough that I could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow. His expression was intense, searching, and for a moment something passed between us that had nothing to do with the near accident and everything to do with the way I suddenly couldn't breathe. Then he was setting me down carefully, his hands lingering for just a second on my arms before he stepped back. "You need to be more aware of your surroundings," he said, his voice returning to its usual gruffness. "Could have been killed." I nodded again, still unable to form words. He studied me for another long moment, then swung back onto his horse. "Let's get this herd moved before something else happens." But as we rode, I couldn't stop thinking about the way his arms had felt around me, or the look in his eyes when our faces had been so close together. After that day, something shifted between us. It was subtle at first, moments that lasted a beat too long, conversations that delved deeper than necessary, an awareness that seemed to crackle in the air whenever we were near each other. Garrett started seeking me out more often, asking me to help with tasks that didn't really require two people. We'd work side by side in comfortable silence, or he'd tell me stories about the ranch, about growing up in Montana, about the years he'd spent working his way up from ranch hand to foreman. "Why'd you come out here?" he asked me one evening as we sat on the porch of the barn, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. We'd finished early for once, and neither of us seemed eager to leave. "Needed a change," I said, which was true if incomplete. "Got tired of living the life everyone else expected me to live." He nodded slowly, taking a long drink from his water bottle. "Know that feeling?" I glanced at him, surprised. Garrett always seemed so sure of himself, so settled in his life. "You do, sure. Spent 5 years doing what my old man wanted, working in construction, living in town, dating the right kind of girls." He said the last part with a slight edge to his voice. "Wasn't until he passed that I gave myself permission to just be who I am, do what makes me happy." There was something significant in the way he said it, something that made my pulse quicken. "And this makes you happy, the ranch?" "Yeah," he said simply, but when he turned to look at me, there was a weight to his gaze that suggested he wasn't just talking about the work. "Being out here, being able to live honestly. It matters." I wanted to ask what he meant by living honestly, but I was afraid of the answer. Afraid that if I pushed, I'd have to acknowledge the thoughts that had been growing louder in my head with every passing day. Thoughts about the way I watched for him every morning, the way my mood lifted when he smiled, the way I'd started finding excuses to stand close to him or brush against him accidentally on purpose. Instead, I just nodded and looked back at the sunset, hyper-aware of how close we were sitting, of the way our shoulders almost touched. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I get that." The silence that followed felt heavy with things unsaid, and when I finally worked up the courage to look at him again, he was still watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he stood abruptly, the moment broken. "Better get some dinner before it's all gone," he said, his voice carefully neutral. But as we walked back toward the main house, I couldn't help but notice that he stayed close enough that our arms brushed with every other step. The next few weeks were a study in tension and restraint. Every interaction felt charged, loaded with subtext that neither of us acknowledged directly. Garrett would stand behind me to correct my rope technique, his chest nearly touching my back, his breath warm against my ear as he murmured instructions. I'd look up to find him watching me across the corral, his expression intense and unreadable. During lunch breaks, we'd sit together slightly apart from the other hands, our conversations ranging from the mundane to the surprisingly personal. I learned that he loved classical music but was embarrassed to admit it, that he'd taught himself to play guitar during long winter nights, that he'd been in love once but it hadn't worked out for reasons he didn't specify. I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, my struggles with my father's expectations, my feeling of never quite fitting into the life I was supposed to want, the relief I felt out here where I could simply be. "You're different than when you first arrived," Garrett observed one afternoon as we repaired a section of fence together. The sun was high and hot, and we'd both stripped down to t-shirts, our work shirts tied around our waists. More confident, stronger. I looked down at my hands, noting the new calluses and the way my arms had developed definition from the constant physical work. "Feel different," I admitted. "Feel like maybe I'm finally figuring out who I actually am." When I glanced up, Garrett was watching me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. "Yeah," he said softly, "I can see that." Our eyes held for a long moment, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach intensify into something bigger, something I could no longer deny. I wanted to close the distance between us, to reach out and touch him, to ask if he felt this too, this pull, this connection, this constant awareness. But then one of the other hands called out from across the field, and the moment shattered. Garrett turned away, his jaw tight, and went back to work with renewed focus. We didn't speak much for the rest of the day, but the tension between us only seemed to grow thicker, more suffocating. That night, I lay awake in the bunkhouse, listening to the quiet breathing of the other hands and trying to sort through the chaos in my head. I'd never let myself think too hard about my sexuality. There'd been a girlfriend or two in college, relationships that felt nice enough but ultimately hollow. I'd always assumed I just hadn't met the right person yet. But now, lying here thinking about Garrett, about his smile, his strength, the way he made me feel seen and valued, I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. I was attracted to him, maybe more than attracted. The realization should have terrified me, but instead, it felt like something clicking into place, like a truth I'd been running from finally catching up to me. Everything came to a head during a thunderstorm in late summer. The day had started hot and oppressive, the air thick with the promise of rain. Garrett and I had been assigned to check the fence line in the north pasture, a job that would take most of the day. We'd set out early, the tension between us palpable but unspoken as always. The storm rolled in faster than expected, dark clouds racing across the sky and turning afternoon into twilight. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, and within minutes it was a downpour. "Barn's closer than the house," Garrett shouted over the wind, already turning his horse. "Let's wait it out there." We rode hard, arriving at the old north barn just as lightning split the sky. The structure was solid but unused, filled with dusty equipment and old hay bales. We dismounted quickly, leading the horses into the relative shelter and tying them near the entrance. I was soaked through, my clothes plastered to my body, and I couldn't stop shivering despite the warmth of the day. Garrett looked just as drenched, his t-shirt clinging to the impressive muscles of his chest and arms. Water dripped from his hair and beard, and when he pushed his hair back from his face, I had to force myself to look away. "Might be here a while," he said, wringing out his shirt hem uselessly. "This storm looks serious." I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, the sound of rain on the metal roof deafening, the air between us crackling with more than just the electricity of the storm. "Mason," Garrett said suddenly, and something in his tone made me look up. He was watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch, his gray eyes nearly black in the dim light. "I need to tell you something." My heart started to pound. "Okay." He took a step closer and I instinctively backed up until I hit the wall. He followed, stopping just a foot away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low and rough. "Can't keep pretending like there's nothing, like I don't." He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Don't what?" I whispered, even though I was terrified of the answer. His eyes searched mine, and I saw conflict there, desire warring with restraint. "Like I don't think about you every damn minute of every damn day. Like I don't want." He stopped, jaw clenching. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong. Tell me it's just me and I'll back off. I'll keep it professional. But I need to know, Mason. Am I alone in this?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and danger. My mind raced, thinking about consequences, about what this could mean, about the life I'd left behind and the one I was building here. But mostly I thought about the way my heart felt like it might burst just from being this close to him, the way every fiber of my being was screaming at me to close the distance between us. "No," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. "You're not alone." Something flared in his eyes, relief, hunger, joy all mixed together. "Thank God," he breathed, and then he was moving closer, one hand coming up to cup my face while the other braced against the wall beside my head. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his face inches from mine. "If you want me to stop, tell me now." Instead of answering, I grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him the rest of the way toward me. Our lips met in a kiss that felt like lightning and thunder rolled into one, fierce and desperate and long overdue. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him, and I melted into his embrace like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding into my hair while mine explored the broad expanse of his back. He tasted like rain and coffee and something indefinably him, and I couldn't get enough. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Been wanting to do that since the day you fell off that fence," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I laughed shakily. "Been wanting you to do that just as long." He pulled back slightly to look at me, his hand still cradled against my cheek. "This changes everything," he said seriously. "You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said, covering his hand with mine. "I know. And you're okay with that, because once we cross this line, Mason, I don't think I can go back. I don't want to go back." The vulnerability in his voice made my chest tight. This man who seemed so strong and confident was looking at me like I held his heart in my hands. "I don't want to go back either," I said firmly. "I want this, want you." He kissed me again, softer this time, almost reverent. When he pulled away, he was smiling, a real, full smile that transformed his whole face and made him look younger, lighter. "Come on," he said, taking my hand and leading me deeper into the barn where some old furniture created a sheltered corner. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. We spent the next few hours in that barn, talking in a way we'd never let ourselves talk before. Sitting close together on an old bench, our hands intertwined, we shared stories about coming to terms with who we were. Garrett told me about the relationship he'd mentioned before, a man he'd met in college who'd ultimately chosen a more conventional life, breaking Garrett's heart and making him retreat to the ranch where he could be himself without judgment. "I told myself I wouldn't do this again," he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "Wouldn't let myself care about someone who might not be ready for what it means to be with another man out here, People are more accepting than they used to be, but it's still Montana. It's still a ranch. There are still people who won't understand. I'm ready, I said firmly. I know I'm new to all this, to understanding myself this way, but I'm sure about this. About you. He looked at me searchingly, then nodded slowly. Your family, they know, I shook my head. My father would disown me. He had my whole life planned out: law school, partnership at his firm, marriage to some woman from the right family. That's part of why I ran. I couldn't breathe there anymore, couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. You won't have to pretend here, Garrett said, squeezing my hand. Not with me. The rain finally began to ease as the afternoon wore into evening. We rode back to the main ranch in the dying light, neither of us speaking, but the silence comfortable now, loaded with promise instead of tension. Before we parted at the barn to tend to our horses, Garrett caught my wrist. Meet me later, he asked quietly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. There's a spot by the creek. Private, I'll show you. My heart kicked up. What time? Hour after dinner. I'll wait for you. He released my wrist and stepped back, but not before his fingers trailed across my palm in a gesture that felt intimate despite its brevity. That hour felt like the longest of my life. The spot by the creek was hidden by a grove of cottonwood trees, the sound of running water creating a natural privacy screen. Garrett was already there when I arrived, sitting on a flat boulder and looking up at the stars that were just beginning to emerge. He turned when he heard me approach, and his smile made my steps quicken. Wasn't sure you'd come, he said, though his tone suggested he'd been very sure indeed. Why wouldn't I asked, settling beside him on the boulder. Our shoulders touched, and the simple contact sent warmth spreading through my chest. Because reality has a way of making things seem more complicated than they do in the moment, he said, turning to look at me. And I know this is all new for you. Thought you might have second thoughts. I reached over and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. I've done nothing but think since this afternoon, and every thought leads me back to the same conclusion. This is what I want. You're what I want. He brought our joined hands up to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that made my breath catch. You have no idea what it means to hear you say that. We sat there for a long time, talking and kissing, and simply being together in a way we couldn't be anywhere else. Garrett told me about his dreams for the future, maybe getting his own small ranch someday, building a life on his own terms. I told him about my writing, a secret passion I'd never pursued because it didn't fit my father's plans. You should write, Garrett said firmly. Life's too short to not do the things that make you happy. Like this, I asked, gesturing between us. Like this, he agreed, pulling me closer so I could rest my head on his shoulder. We stayed until the night grew cold and we had to head back before our absence became too noticeable. Walking back through the darkness, Garrett's hand warm in mine, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. This was right. We were right. Nothing else mattered. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of my life. We were careful at the ranch, maintaining professional distance during the day, but every evening we'd find excuses to slip away together. Sometimes we'd ride out to the creek spot, other times we'd meet in the north barn, and occasionally, when the bunkhouse was empty, we'd steal a few precious minutes alone there. Every conversation, every touch, every kiss felt like a revelation. I'd never known I could feel this way about another person, this complete, consuming attraction that went so much deeper than physical desire. I loved the way Garrett's mind worked, his quiet wisdom and unexpected humor. I loved his gentleness with the animals and his patience with me. I loved the way he looked at me like I was something precious. But we were living on borrowed time, and part of me knew it. The ranch was a small community and people noticed things. I'd catch some of the other hands looking at us speculatively, see the way Dale watched Garrett and me interact with a knowing expression. One evening, one of the older ranch hands, a man named Tom who'd worked at Broken Arrow for 20 years, pulled me aside after dinner. Listen, kid, he said quietly, glancing around to make sure we were alone. I'm gonna give you some advice and you can take it or leave it, but if you and Garrett are gonna keep doing what you're doing, you need to be smarter about it. My stomach dropped. I don't know what you... Save it, Tom interrupted, not unkindly. I got eyes, And I'm not the only one who's noticed the way things are between you two. My face must have shown my panic because he held up a calming hand. Relax, most folks here, they don't care who loves who as long as the work gets done. Dale sure as hell doesn't care, he's known about Garrett for years. But there's a couple of the newer hands who aren't so open-minded. Just be careful, that's all I'm saying. I nodded, my throat tight. Thanks, Tom, he clapped me on the shoulder. Garrett's good people, you two deserve to be happy, just use your heads. That conversation should have made me more cautious, but instead it made me reckless. The idea that we had to hide, that something this good had to be kept secret, made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. I started pushing boundaries, standing too close to Garrett during the day, letting my hand linger when I passed him something, meeting his eyes across the dinner table with an intensity that definitely wasn't subtle. Garrett noticed and he wasn't happy about it. "What are you doing?" he hissed one afternoon when I deliberately brushed against him while reaching for a tool. "We're supposed to be careful." "Why?" I challenged, frustration making my voice sharp. "Because people might figure out that we care about each other. They already know, Garrett." Tom talked to me. He said most people don't even care. "Most isn't all," Garrett said, his jaw tight. "And you're new here, Mason. You don't understand how quickly things can turn if the wrong person decides to make an issue of it. I've seen it happen. So what, we just hide forever, pretend there's nothing between us whenever anyone might see? I'm not saying forever, just not yet. We need to be smart about this." But I was 22 and in love for the first time in my life, and being smart felt like being cowardly. Things came to a head 2 weeks later at the annual ranch barbecue. It was a tradition at Broken Arrow, a big party where ranch families from all over the county came together for food, music, and celebration. There was drinking, dancing, and a general atmosphere of relaxed fun that I'd been looking forward to. Garrett had been tense about it all week, repeatedly reminding me that we needed to keep our distance, that with this many people around, we couldn't risk any slip-ups. I'd agreed, but as the evening wore on and I watched him from across the yard, watched him laugh with other people, watched a pretty woman from a neighboring ranch touch his arm and smile up at him, something dark and jealous twisted in my gut. I knew it was irrational. The woman was just being friendly. And Garrett had barely responded beyond polite courtesy. But seeing someone else touch him, seeing him smile at someone else, made me want to march over there and stake my claim in a way that was definitely not subtle. Instead, I grabbed another beer and tried to focus on the conversation happening around me. But I couldn't stop watching them, couldn't stop the ugly feeling that was growing in my chest. When I saw Garrett excuse himself and head toward the barn, I followed. I found him in the tack room organizing bridles with more force than necessary. "You okay?" I asked, closing the door behind me. He glanced up, surprise flickering across his face. "Fine, just needed some air. Too many people." I moved closer, emboldened by alcohol and jealousy and weeks of restraint. That woman seemed interested. "What woman?" he asked, genuinely confused. "The one from the rocking M, the one who couldn't stop touching you." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like exasperation. "Mason, she was being friendly, that's all. Looked like more than friendly to me." He set down the bridle he'd been holding and turned to face me fully. "Are you seriously jealous right now?" "Maybe," I admitted, hating how petulant I sounded. I hate this. Hate pretending like you're nothing to me. Hate watching other people touch you when I can't." Garrett's expression softened. "I know, I hate it too, but you knew this was how it had to be, at least for now." "For now," I repeated bitterly. "How long is for now, Garrett? How long until we get to actually be together?" "As long as it takes for things to feel safe," he said, his voice patient but firm. "I'm trying to protect us, Mason, protect you." "I don't need protecting," I snapped. "I need you to stop being a coward." The words were out before I could stop them, and I watched them land like a physical blow. Garrett's expression went carefully blank, but I saw the hurt flash through his eyes before he masked it. "Get out," he said quietly. "Garrett, I didn't mean." "I said get out, Mason, go back to the party." My chest felt tight, panic replacing anger. "Please let me, now." The word was hard and final. I left, my eyes burning with unshed tears, and spent the rest of the party in misery. I'd hurt him. I'd said something unforgivable because I was jealous and drunk and stupid, and now I didn't know how to fix it. The next week was torture. Garrett avoided me as much as possible, speaking to me only when necessary and keeping his tone coldly professional. The other hands noticed. Some looked sympathetic, others satisfied, as if they'd been waiting for the shine to wear off the foreman's favoritism toward the new kid. I tried to apologize several times, but Garrett shut me down before I could get more than a few words out. "Nothing to discuss," he'd say, already turning away. "Just focus on your work." But I couldn't focus. Every task felt impossible when all I could think about was the look on Garrett's face when I'd called him a coward. He wasn't a coward. He was careful, protective, thinking about consequences in a way my inexperienced self hadn't bothered to do. A week after the barbecue, Dale called me into his office. I went with a sense of dread, wondering if this was it, if I was about to be fired or transferred or told to leave. But Dale just gestured for me to sit and regarded me with kind but serious eyes. "Want to tell me what's going on between you and Garrett?" he asked directly. I swallowed hard. "Sir, don't lie to me, son. I've seen the way you two look at each other. More importantly, I've seen the way you've both been miserable this past week." My face burned with embarrassment and shame. "I messed up," I admitted. "Said something I shouldn't have, and now he won't even talk to me." Dale nodded slowly. "Garrett's had a hard time of it. Lost someone he cared about because that person wasn't ready for what it meant to be public about their relationship. Made him cautious. Maybe too cautious." "You know," I asked, looking up at him in surprise. "About Garrett. Known since he was 25, and I caught him and the veterinarian's son behind the south barn," Dale said with a slight smile. "Told him then what I'll tell you now. I don't care who my people love as long as they're good at their jobs and treat each other with respect. But the world isn't always as accepting, and Garrett learned that lesson the hard way." "I called him a coward," I said miserably, "because he wanted us to be careful. But he was right. I was being reckless because I was frustrated and I hurt him." "Then tell him that," Dale said simply, "and maybe think about whether you're ready for what a relationship with him would really mean. This isn't the city, Mason. People talk. Some will accept it, some won't. You both need to be strong enough to handle that." I nodded, Dale's words settling heavy in my chest. He was right. I'd been so focused on my own frustration that I hadn't really thought about what Garrett was risking, what he'd already been through. "Thank you," I said quietly, for being okay with this." "Love is hard enough to find without making it harder," Dale said. "Now get out of here and fix things with my foreman. His mood is affecting the whole ranch." I found Garrett that evening at our spot by the creek. He was sitting on the boulder where we'd spent so many evenings, his shoulders tense, staring at the water. I approached slowly, half afraid he'd leave when he saw me. But he just glanced over, his expression carefully neutral, and turned back to the creek. "Can I sit?" I asked when I reached him. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either, so I took that as permission. We sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of running water the only noise between us. "I'm sorry," I said finally, "for what I said at the barbecue, for calling you a coward. You're not. You're the bravest person I know." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he still didn't look at me. "I know this is hard for you," he said quietly. "Being careful, hiding. It's hard for me too, Mason. Every damn day it's hard, but I've been through this before, and I'm trying to keep us from making mistakes that could cost us everything." "I know," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "And you were right to be cautious. I was being selfish and reckless because I wanted what I wanted without thinking about the consequences. Dale talked to me today. Made me realize I wasn't taking this seriously enough, wasn't thinking about what you've already been through. That finally made him turn to look at me. Dale talked to you. He knows, has known about you for years apparently, and he said he's okay with it, but that the world isn't always that accepting." I shifted to face him more fully. "I get it now. Why you were so careful. I should have listened instead of pushing." Garrett studied me for a long moment, something vulnerable in his expression. "That woman at the barbecue, she doesn't mean anything to me. No one does, just you." My chest felt tight with emotion. "I know, I was jealous and stupid, and I took it out on you in the worst way possible. I'm so sorry, Garrett, please forgive me." He reached out slowly, his hand cupping my face the way he'd done in the barn during that first kiss. I'm sorry too. For shutting you out instead of talking to you about why I was worried. We're supposed to be a team. We are a team, I said firmly, covering his hand with mine. And I promise I'll do better. I'll be smarter, more careful, whatever you need. He pulled me close, and I went willingly, burying my face in his neck and breathing in his familiar scent. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt the tension that had been coiling in my chest for days finally start to unwind. Missed you, he murmured against my hair. Missed this. Me too, so much. We held each other as the sun set, neither of us speaking, just taking comfort in being close again. When we finally pulled apart, Garrett brushed his thumb across my cheekbone. We'll figure this out, he said. Together, but we have to be smart about it, okay, for both our sakes. I nodded. Together, I agreed. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. The weeks that followed were different. We were more careful, yes, but we were also more intentional. Instead of stolen moments that felt frantic and secretive, we made plans. Garrett started teaching me to play guitar in the evenings, the two of us tucked away in the north barn where no one would interrupt. We'd ride out to check distant fence lines and take the long way back, stopping at scenic spots to talk and simply be together. We still kept our distance at the ranch, still maintained professional boundaries, but now there was an understanding between us, a shared knowledge that we were working towards something, building something real. Dale helped by occasionally sending us on two-person jobs that took us away from the main ranch for hours or even overnight. Someone needs to check the north pasture fence line, he'd say casually. Garrett, take Mason, should be a 2-day job. We'd exchange glances, trying not to let our relief and gratitude show too obviously. Those trips became some of my favorite memories, sleeping under the stars, cooking over a campfire, talking until late into the night about everything and nothing. Garrett opened up more, telling me about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. I shared my own stories, my struggles with my father's expectations, my growing certainty that this life, ranch life, life with Garrett, was what I'd been searching for all along. What happens when the season ends? I asked one night as we lay in our sleeping bags, positioned close enough that we could hold hands between them. The fall was progressing, and soon the ranch would scale back its crew for winter. Some of the seasonal hands had already left. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Dale usually keeps a skeleton crew through winter. I'm year-round, obviously, and he's asked me if there's anyone I think we should keep on. My heart started to pound, and I told him we should keep you. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. If you want to stay. Do you want me to stay? I asked, needing to hear him say it. Yes, he said simply, turning to look at me. I want you to stay, not just for winter, for as long as you'll have me. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability, made my chest ache in the best way. Forever then, I said, if that's what you're offering. He pulled me closer, and I shifted so I could rest my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Forever sounds good to me, he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. But of course nothing was ever that simple. As winter approached, one of the newer ranch hands, a man named Derek who joined mid-season, started making comments. At first they were subtle, almost deniable. Funny how Mason always gets the cushy jobs with the foreman, he'd say to the other hands. Must be nice to have special treatment. Or, those two sure spend a lot of time together. Wonder what they talk about for hours. The other hands mostly ignored him, but his comments got bolder as time went on. Tom had been right. Most people at the ranch didn't care about Garrett's sexuality or our relationship, but Derek clearly did, and he was the type of person who thrived on making others uncomfortable. Garrett handled it with calm professionalism, never rising to the bait, but I could see the tension building in him. Then one afternoon in early November, things came to a head. We were all working on winterizing the equipment in the main barn when Derek made another comment, this one more explicit. Maybe if I sucked up to Garrett the way Mason does, I'd get better treatment too, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The barn went quiet. Every hand stopped what they were doing, looking between Derek, Garrett, and me with varying expressions of discomfort. I felt my face heat with anger and embarrassment, but before I could respond, Garrett stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough," Derek laughed. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. The new kid shows up, can barely sit a horse, and suddenly he's your shadow. We all know why." "You don't know anything," Garrett said, moving closer to Derek with a controlled intensity that made the other man take a step back. "And you're way out of line." "Am I?" Derek challenged, though his confidence seemed to waver slightly. "Or am I the only one willing to say what's obvious? You're giving him special treatment because I'm what?" Garrett interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "Say it. If you've got something to say, have the guts to say it to my face." The tension in the barn was suffocating. I could see Tom and some of the other longtime hands watching with hard expressions, clearly on Garrett's side but letting him handle it. Derek looked around, realizing he didn't have the support he'd expected. "Look, I'm just saying." "No," Garrett cut him off. "You're not just saying anything. You're making unfounded accusations and creating a hostile work environment. Mason gets the same jobs as everyone else, puts in the same hours, does good work better than some who have been here twice as long." His gaze swept over Derek meaningfully. "If you have a problem with how I run my crew, take it to Dale. But I'm done listening to your disrespectful bullshit." "Got it?" Derek's face had gone red, but he nodded stiffly. "Good. Now get back to work, all of you." The hands scattered, returning to their tasks with renewed focus. Derek shot me a venomous look before stalking off to the far end of the barn. Tom caught my eye and nodded approvingly, and I felt a rush of gratitude for these men who'd become something like family. But the incident shook me more than I wanted to admit. That night I met Garrett at the creek as planned, but the easy comfort we'd built over the past months felt strained. He was quiet, staring at the water with a distant expression. "You okay?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Should have seen that coming," he said, not answering my question. "Should have known Derek would be a problem. He's had it in for me since he started." "This isn't your fault, isn't it?" He turned to look at me, and I saw frustration and guilt in his eyes. "Maybe I have been giving you special treatment. Maybe I've been so caught up in wanting to be near you that I haven't been as fair as I should be." "That's not true," I said firmly. "You've been harder on me than anyone else, pushed me to improve, never let me slack off. Everything I've learned, every skill I've developed, that's because you're a good teacher, not because of anything else." He shook his head. "But the perception is what matters, and if people think I'm showing favoritism, then they're wrong," I interrupted. "Tom knows it, Dale knows it, everyone who matters knows it. Derek's just an asshole looking for attention." "Derek's a symptom of a bigger problem," Garrett said quietly. "We can't hide forever, Mason. Eventually this becomes public knowledge, and when it does—" He trailed off, but I could hear the fear beneath his words. Fear that he'd lose his position, his reputation, maybe even his home at the ranch he'd worked at for years. "Then we deal with it," I said, taking his hand. "Together." "You say that now," he said, squeezing my fingers. "But you don't know what it's like. The looks, the comments, the way some people treat you differently once they know. I've lived through it before, and it almost broke me." "I'm not him," I said, understanding that we were really talking about the man from Garrett's past. "Whoever hurt you before, whoever left, I'm not him. I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for something. Whatever he found must have reassured him because he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." But I could tell he was still worried, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Winter settled in hard and fast, bringing snow that covered the ranch in white and turned the work both harder and quieter. Most of the seasonal hands had gone, leaving just a core crew of 10, including Garrett and me. Derek had been let go, Dale's decision after hearing about the incident from Tom, and his absence made the atmosphere much more comfortable. The reduced crew meant Garrett and I worked together almost constantly, and without Derek's hostile presence, the other hands seemed more relaxed about our obvious closeness. No one said anything directly, but there were knowing looks and small smiles that suggested our relationship was an open secret among those who remained. Christmas approached, and Dale announced he was hosting a dinner for the crew and their families. "You boys are welcome to bring someone if you have someone to bring," he'd said, his eyes lingering meaningfully on Garrett and me. That night, Garrett and I discussed it in the relative privacy of the north barn where we'd been storing winter feed. We could go together, I suggested carefully. As a couple. Garrett looked torn. Mason, hear me out, I interrupted gently. It's just us and Dale and the crew who already know anyway. Tom, Mike, the others, they don't care. This could be a safe space to just be ourselves. And if word gets out beyond the ranch, then we handle it, I said, echoing my earlier words. But we can't live our whole lives afraid of what if. At some point, we have to just live. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the moment he made his decision. Okay, he said. Okay, we'll go together, officially. Relief and joy flooded through me. Yeah. He pulled me close, kissing me with a tenderness that made my knees weak. You're right. It's time to stop hiding, at least from the people who matter. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and work. The Christmas dinner was set for December 23rd, and as the date approached, I found myself equal parts excited and nervous. This would be the first time Garrett and I appeared together as a couple in front of others. The first time we'd be public, even in this small way. The dinner was held in Dale's large ranch house, the dining room decorated with simple but festive decorations. When Garrett and I arrived together, there was a moment of silence as everyone registered what it meant. Then Tom stood up with his beer raised. About damn time, he said with a grin. Was wondering how long you two were gonna dance around it. The other hands laughed and raised their own drinks, and just like that, the tension broke. We were welcomed warmly, treated no differently than any other couple there. Dale caught my eye across the room and nodded approvingly, and I felt a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying lift from my shoulders. Garrett's hand found mine under the table, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar. You okay? He murmured, leaning close enough that his shoulder pressed against mine. Perfect, I said honestly, looking around at the faces of people who'd become family. This is perfect. Later, after dinner, when people had moved to the living room for drinks and conversation, Dale pulled Garrett and me aside. Wanted to talk to you both, he said, gesturing us into his study. We followed, exchanging nervous glances. Dale closed the door and turned to face us with a serious expression. I want you to know that you have my full support, he said without preamble. Both of you, as individuals and as a couple. Thank you, sir, Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. That means more than you know. I also want you to know that I'm making some changes, Dale continued. Getting older, thinking about the future of this ranch. Been considering making you a partner, Garrett, someone to eventually take over when I'm ready to step back. Garrett's eyes went wide. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Dale said with a slight smile, and that you'll consider making this ranch your permanent home. Bring your partner with you. His gaze shifted to me. If that partner is willing. My throat felt tight. I'm willing, I managed. More than willing. Dale nodded, satisfied. Good. We'll talk details after the holidays, but I wanted you both to know where you stand. This ranch is better with both of you on it. Walking back to the bunkhouse that night, Garrett and I took the long way, neither of us ready for the evening to end. The snow crunched under our boots and our breath misted in the cold air. Above us, the stars were brilliant against the black sky. Did that really just happen? I asked, still trying to process Dale's offer. Think so, Garrett said, sounding equally dazed. He wants to make me a partner. You deserve it. You've given years of your life to this ranch. Garrett corrected, stopping to face me. He said, bring your partner. That's we, Mason. He's offering us a future here, together. The full weight of it hit me then, not just acceptance, but belonging. A place where we could be ourselves without fear, where we could build the life we wanted. I love you, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. It was the first time either of us had said it, and I saw Garrett's expression shift from surprise to joy. I love you too, he said, pulling me close. God, I love you so much. We kissed there in the snow under the vast Montana sky, and I felt like every choice that had brought me to this point, leaving Boston, coming to the ranch, pushing past my fears, had led me exactly where I needed to be. Come on, Garrett said, taking my hand and leading me toward his cabin instead of the bunkhouse. Stay with me tonight. Always, I promised, and I meant it. The rest of winter passed in a kind of peaceful contentment I'd never experienced before. Garrett and I stopped hiding our relationship, and while it did cause some talk in town when we went in for supplies, most people's reactions ranged from acceptance to indifference. There were a few uncomfortable moments, a store owner who refused to serve us, some hostile looks at the feed store, but nothing we couldn't handle together. The ranch became our sanctuary, a place where we could simply be. Garrett taught me more about running a ranch operation, preparing me for the partnership role that seemed increasingly likely. We spent long evenings planning improvements, discussing breeding strategies, dreaming about the future. When spring arrived, Dale made it official. Garrett became a junior partner with the promise of full ownership when Dale was ready to retire. We celebrated quietly, just the core crew and a few neighboring ranchers who'd become friends. That night, lying in Garrett's bed, our bed now, I thought about how drastically my life had changed in less than a year. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. "How I ended up here," I said. How running away from the life I was supposed to have led me to the life I actually wanted. "No regrets." "None," I said firmly, tilting my head to kiss him. "Best decision I ever made. Even with everything that happened, the hiding, the complications, Derek's bullshit. Especially with all that," I said, "because it taught me that anything worth having is worth fighting for. And this life we're building, it's worth everything." He pulled me closer and I settled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, I could hear the sound of the ranch settling in for the night, horses moving in their stalls, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant call of an owl. "I knew," Garrett said quietly. "That day in the barn during the storm, when you kissed me. I knew you were it for me, the one I'd been waiting for." "Took you long enough to kiss me first," I teased. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Had to make sure you wanted it. Couldn't risk making a move if I'd been reading the signals wrong." "You read them perfectly." "Yeah," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "I did." We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that we'd found something rare: love, acceptance, and a home worth keeping. 6 months later, I stood in the north barn watching rain hammer against the roof, the memory of that first storm vivid in my mind. So much had changed since that day, when everything had come to a head between Garrett and me. Dale had officially retired the month before, leaving Garrett as the majority owner of Broken Arrow Ranch. We'd bought out his remaining stake with plans to rename it the Double G Ranch, for Garrett and me. The core crew had stayed on, and we'd hired several new hands for the summer season. This time, when we did the hearing, we'd been open about our relationship from the start. "This is a ranch that values hard work and respect," Garrett had told each prospective employee. "And this is my partner, Mason. If anyone has a problem with that, this isn't the place for you." Most hadn't batted an eye. One or two had politely declined the job, but they'd been in the minority. We'd built a good crew, people who cared more about doing quality work than who the bosses were sleeping with. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Garrett approaching, a familiar smile on his face. "Thinking about that first storm?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "How'd you know?" "Because I was thinking about it too. How I stood right here and told you I couldn't pretend anymore. Best decision I ever made." I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. "Best decision I ever made was pulling you in for that kiss." "Bossy from the start," he teased, but his eyes were warm. "You love it." "I love you," he corrected, and even after all these months, hearing him say it still made my heart skip. We stood there watching the rain, comfortable in the silence, until Garrett spoke again. "Got a call from your father today." I tensed. I hadn't spoken to my father in over a year, since the letter I'd sent him explaining that I wouldn't be coming back to Boston or following his plans. He'd responded with anger and ultimatums, then eventually silence when I made it clear I wasn't changing my mind. "What did he want?" "Said he'd heard you were running a ranch in Montana. Wanted to know if it was true." My stomach twisted with anxiety. "What did you tell him?" "Told him it was true, that you were my partner in every sense of the word, that you were happy and successful and exactly where you needed to be." I looked at Garrett in surprise. "You told him about us?" Figured it was time, Garrett said with a shrug. He's your father. He deserves to know the truth, even if he doesn't like it. How did he react? Hung up on me, Garrett admitted. But then he called back an hour later and asked if he could come visit. Said he wanted to see for himself what kind of life his son had built. My throat felt tight. He wants to visit here, if you're willing to see him. I told him I'd have to check with you first, that it was your call. I thought about it, about the father who'd tried to control every aspect of my life, who'd wanted me to be someone I wasn't. But I also thought about the months I'd spent here, the person I'd become, the life I'd built with Garrett. Let him come, I said finally. Let him see what I've made of myself. Let him see us. Garrett squeezed my hand. You sure? Yeah, I'm not the same person who left Boston. I'm not afraid of his judgment anymore. I know who I am now, and I know what matters. We'll face it together, Garrett promised, pulling me close. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. I leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Together, I agreed. My father arrived 2 weeks later, driving up to the ranch in a rental car that looked completely out of place among the pickup trucks. I watched from the porch as he got out, noting how small he seemed compared to my memory. Or maybe I was the one who'd grown. Garrett stood beside me, his hand resting supportively on the small of my back. You ready? He murmured. Ready, I confirmed, though my heart was pounding. My father approached slowly, his eyes taking in the ranch, the mountains, the life I'd built. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked at me, really looked at me for what felt like the first time in years. You look good, son, he said quietly. Healthy, strong. I am, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm happy here, Dad, happier than I've ever been. He nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to Garrett. You must be Garrett Sullivan. Sir, Garrett said, extending his hand. Thank you for making the trip. My father shook his hand, and I saw him register Garrett's firm grip, his steady gaze, the quiet confidence he carried. Thank you for taking care of my son, for, he paused, seeming to struggle for words, for being what he needed when I couldn't. I felt tears prick at my eyes at the unexpected admission. Dad, can we talk? He asked, looking back at me. Just the two of us. I glanced at Garrett, who nodded supportively. I'll be in the barn if you need me, he said quietly, squeezing my shoulder before heading away. My father and I walked to the fence line overlooking the north pasture. We stood in silence for a long moment before he spoke. I was wrong, he said abruptly, about the life I wanted for you, about who I thought you should be. I was trying to give you what I thought you needed, but I never asked what you actually wanted. I wanted to be accepted for who I am, I said, the words I'd never been able to say to him coming easier now. I wanted you to be proud of me for what I chose to do, not for following your blueprint. I am proud of you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Looking at this place, seeing what you've built, the man you've become, I'm incredibly proud, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. We talked for over an hour, really talked, maybe for the first time ever. I told him about the ranch, about my partnership with Garrett, about the life we were building. He told me about realizing after I left how much he tried to control me, about his own regrets and fears. Your mother would have handled this better, he admitted. She always understood you better than I did. My mother had died when I was 12, and I felt a pang of grief for what she'd missed. She would have liked Garrett, I said. She would have liked seeing me this happy. He makes you happy, my father asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, not judgment. More than I knew was possible, I said honestly. He's everything I didn't know I needed. My father nodded slowly. Then that's enough for me. I may not understand it all, but I understand that you're happy and healthy and living authentically. That's what matters. When we walked back to the ranch house, Garrett was waiting on the porch, trying to look casual but clearly nervous. My father approached him directly. Mr. Sullivan, Garrett, I want to thank you for taking care of my son, for loving him. Garrett's eyes widened in surprise, but he recovered quickly. He makes it easy, sir. Your son is remarkable. He is, my father agreed, and the pride in his voice made my chest tight with emotion. Take care of him. Always, Garrett promised. My father stayed for 3 days, and by the time he left, something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. He'd never be perfect, would probably never fully understand my life, but he was trying. That was more than I'd ever hoped for. You'll come visit for Thanksgiving, he asked as he prepared to leave. Bring Garrett, I want you both there. I agreed, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known I needed. As we watched his car disappear down the ranch road, Garrett wrapped his arm around my shoulders. That went better than expected. Yeah, I said, leaning into him. It really did. We stood there for a moment looking out at the ranch, our ranch, and I felt the full weight of how far I'd come. From the lost, uncertain person who'd arrived here over a year ago to who I was now confident, happy, loved. You know what I was thinking, Garrett said, breaking the comfortable silence. What's that? Remember that first day, when Dale told you to do exactly what I say? I laughed. I remember. I was terrified of you. You should have been, he teased. I was ready to run you off the ranch within a week. What changed your mind? I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. He turned to face me, his hands coming up to frame my face. You did, the way you kept trying even when things were hard. The way you looked at me like I was worth something more than just a paycheck. The way you made me feel like maybe I could have this, a partner, a home, a future that didn't involve being alone. You're never going to be alone again, I promised. I'm here for the long haul, forever, remember. Forever, he agreed, kissing me softly. Through every storm and sunny day, through everything. We kissed there on the porch of the ranch house in broad daylight where anyone could see, and I felt nothing but joy. This life, this love, this home we'd built together, it was everything, and it was only the beginning. 3 years later, I stood in the north barn, watching another summer storm roll across the mountains, and smiled at how much had changed since that first storm that had brought Garrett and me together. The Double G Ranch was thriving. We'd expanded our herd, built a reputation for quality cattle, and earned the respect of ranchers throughout the state. But more than that, we'd built a life. Garrett and I had gotten married the previous spring in a simple ceremony on the ranch, surrounded by the crew and friends who'd become family. My father had walked me down the makeshift aisle, tears in his eyes, and given Garrett his blessing. We'd bought a house on the property, nothing fancy, just a comfortable place that was entirely ours. We'd adopted a dog, a shepherd mix we'd named Storm as a private joke. We'd made plans for the future, maybe taking in foster kids someday, maybe expanding the ranch operations, maybe just growing old together on this land we loved. I heard familiar footsteps and turned to see Garrett approaching, his face breaking into the smile he reserved just for me. Knew I'd find you here, he said, coming to stand beside me. Remembering. Always, I said, taking his hand. How far we've come. He kissed my temple. How far we're going to go. We stood there watching the rain, and I thought about the frightened, lost person I'd been when I first arrived here, about the foreman who'd seemed so intimidating and who'd become everything to me, about the journey we'd taken from strangers to partners to husbands. I love you, I said, the words as easy and natural as breathing. I love you too, Garrett replied, now and always. The storm passed, as storms do, leaving the world clean and new and full of possibility. And as we walked back to our house together, hand in hand, I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges or joys or adventures, we'd face them exactly as we'd faced everything else. Together. The end. Belle, did this story touch your heart? If you found yourself lost in Mason and Garrett's journey, if you felt the tension, the longing, and the beautiful resolution of their love story, please let me know by hitting that like button and subscribing for more heartfelt stories. Speech balloon comment below. Let me know in the comments.